right, welcome everybody. Welcome tonight. I'm Rabbi Devorah Lynn, and I am a co-founder of Jewish Earth Alliance, and I want to welcome you all to our meeting, our monthly network meeting tonight. We always start with an inspiration, and tonight we have Rabbi Fred Scherlinder Dobb from Potomac, Maryland. And you know, I don't want to introduce him with a longer introduction than the length of time I've given him to speak. So I'm only going to tell you the eco stuff in his biography, which is quite extensive. But he's a graduate of the Reconstructionist College in '97, and when he accepted a position at Adat Shalom in Potomac, Maryland. And it's new. How old's the building? It's from 2000? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. 2000. Yeah. So you were the supervisor of building that beautiful and unusual building that has an internal tent. They are known for this unusual and beautiful architecture. And they have a Mishnah organic garden outside that's gardened by the congregants. You have rooftop solar panels from 2012, low energy star energy use that's been awarded, given an award, sustainable materials, eco education, habitat friendly surroundings for wildlife, and you bring reduce, reuse and recycle to an admirable level. You are the chair of the national COEJL, the Coalition on the Environment and Jewish Life. You were the chair of the Greater Washington Interfaith Power and Light, and co-chair of Religious Witness for the Earth, the boards of the Reconstructionist Rabbinic Association, and the Shalom Center. And I'm done. And no, but the most important thing is that Mirala Goldsmith is one of your members. There you go.
As is Amy Dick, but on this
Amy
call,
Dick too.
But we are all in this together.
Yes.
And you'll see a slide if we get there with it to that effect. Honored
so please
to be
share
with you
your
all.
inspiration with us.
Honored to be with you all. And yes, we are thrilled to run one of the greener shuls in the area and to be something of a demonstration site. So when we go back to visiting, please come and visit. So I thought, can you enable screen sharing or make me a co-host, please? Thinking what's as a tie-in to tonight's talk from Karen, as well as the action alert around sustainable agriculture and just agriculture. I was thinking, what's the timing hook, if you will? And the obvious answer, of course, is the spring equinox, but it is properly known simply as the March equinox, because obviously in the Southern Hemisphere, this is the fall equinox, and we're trying slowly to adopt a more global consciousness. We all know that this week is one of those magic moments when there is equity in this most unjustly divided Earth, where 12 hours of sun and 12 hours of dark for every citizen of the planet. Except right at the poles, because that's sort of, those are anomalies. And of course, the natural growing cycle depends on this. Many of you know the nature writing classic from our own backyard, Lewis Halley, written during World War II, Spring in Washington. It's an incredible read. He reminds us that our local spring essentially starts in January, and he was writing that when the average growing cycle or cycle of migrating birds was at least 3 weeks later than it is now. So we need to heed the wisdom of those who've been watching this for a long time. He was a bureaucrat in World War II, and all the things that we focus on in our day lives, is it possible that the perennial process of budding and leafing in the neighboring woods is even more important? Well, yes, actually. So the price of wolfram, whatever that is not like the budding of trees, a dependable fact of life. It vanishes from sight in the long perspective. It's excluded from the final reckoning. When we have completed our operations in whatever markets we're in, we haven't really done anything to enrich the life of humanity or increase our potential. But if we will observe the trees, we may preach revelation to remote descendants. So that's just the beginning of the importance of being rooted in place. Of course, place in Hebrew, makom, is one of the names of God. So the idea of bioregionalism going back to the 80s, which is develop a sense of place, literally in Hebrew translates as a sense of godliness, because God is immanent wherever we are if we open our eyes to the godliness around us. So this is the spring equinox this very week. 6 months later is the fall equinox, which is always close to Rosh Hashanah. And this Rosh Hashanah begins something that's not a 6-month cycle, but a 7-year cycle. And Mirala and I are both very big fans of Shemitah, and you'll be hearing a whole lot more about it if you haven't. But this is the T-minus 6 month and counting reminder. So for a long time, I've taught Shemitah with something like this, that it's the grand unification theory of progressive, sustainable, just Judaism, because it brings everything together. It's in Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. It's a cessation of organized, intensive agriculture, but it's also a release of debts, and it's also favoring the poor and the structurally disadvantaged, and it singles out the wild animals that they too shall eat, and it is about community, and it is about resilience. So resilient micro-community, we've learned what disruptions look like. We're living through one right now. Shemitah consciousness would have helped and can yet. Social and economic justice, special concern for the most vulnerable, the least among us. The larger ecological sustainability, land stewardship, really at the heart of tonight's action call, and all the ways that we can celebrate that. Personal sustainability, that we need to be in it for the long haul ourselves, as well as in community. Redistributive justice, instead of the intensive agriculture that is primarily big ag, everything is a community commons. Wild and perennial produce gets shared equally 1 year in 7. What a vision. And of course, thinking long-term. Notice how that lines up with tonight's action alert and what's been introduced as the Agriculture Resilience Act. Look here in the middle, the agriculture section of the House Climate Crisis Report. 7 major components: carbon sequestration, resilience, decreasing greenhouse gas emissions, which is thinking long-term, technical assistance and research, which is we're all in it together, on-farm renewable energy, energy efficiency, the next generation of farmers, preserving the land, and reducing waste, which is exactly what you do when the norms of an agricultural capitalist economy are upended. If we could live as if every 7th year we had to do that, just think of how much closer we would already be as a society to the place that JEA and all of our sister organizations is working for us to get to. So that's enough Torah for one evening. I mean, there's never enough Torah, but because what Karen is going to talk about from the scientific and policy perspective, and what we're going to hear more about from the organizing perspective, that too is Torah. Happy equinox, and get ready for Shemitah.
There you go. Thank you so much, Rabbi Fred. And in some ways, I think this is going to feel like the 49th year that here we are with COVID and down, I don't even know, you know, just having a Shemitah year this year and then next year be Jubilee. If we can raise our consciousness on what we've learned this year about what we can do with and without, and progress can be made. Thank you so much. Blessings to you. So welcome everybody. We wanted to ask you to do a little work for us, for Jewish Earth Alliance. We have been very focused. We'd like you to introduce each other to, and we're going to do small breakout groups tonight. But we want you to answer a question in the breakout room, if you don't mind, that we have been discussing at the steering meeting, that we are very focused on our letter writing project, and we're feeling a real lift in the last few months, getting lots more groups and lots more letters. But we also have been talking that we could think about augmenting the letters with other alternatives. And so we want you to go into breakout groups and introduce yourselves to each other and brainstorm on, in a perfect world, in a perfect Jewish Earth Alliance world, what other alternative actions would you like to take? And we were calling it beyond letters, kind of like beyond meat. D, Herman, I'm sorry, I meant to, D, are you here?
I'm here.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I wanted you to direct this. Can you list what you had in the newsletter, the alternatives that we already had talked about?
If you give me a minute, I got to pull it up.
Okay.
Dee, I can put it up on the screen, I think.
Oh, that would be
good.
Great. Why don't you do that then?
This might even be a little more than was in the news.
Yeah, I only put in 3 in the newsletter this time, so that's going to be more than that, which is fine.
Okay. Well, what were the 3 that you put?
Well, you think I remember?
I think it's the first 3.
Yeah, I think it was the first 3. Putting things out on social media, writing your local Jewish leaders, and calling Congress people. Yes, I think it was those 3.
Yeah. And we were talking about organizing some in-depth study sessions on issues and artworks of all sorts. But so Ed, why don't you put us into breakout groups for, let's say, like 7 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, let's say 7 minutes. And is that too long? I don't know.
No, that's good.
That's good. 7 minutes. And brainstorm on other things that you would like to do that are possibility. Okay, we're back. So would people like to quickly give us a report from your groups that we can write down these brainstorms? From our group.
From our group, I'll report.
Okay, go ahead.
We talked about op-eds that we could put in the paper and like the importance of timing with that. We talked about art that gets people's attention. Was there something else I forgot?
Educational webinars,
Oh,
and,
webinars, yeah.
and letters to the editor.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've done the educational, we have done, those seem to be going pretty big guns, educational webinars. Op-eds, we were talking about those with that they have a time lag. But we'll think about that. Anybody else's group want to report? How about my group? Somebody want to report from that, or was I the one taking the notes? Amy, were you in a group, or Lisa? Were you in a group you want to report on?
Well, I can report on our group. We spoke about, let's see, how wonderful it is once COVID is over to bring speakers about, like we would bring we talked about bringing speakers like to our Shabbat services afterwards to a lunch and learn. We talked about focusing in on a monthly earth challenge. Yeah, well, we're monthly where the members of the community could do something, toward their own kind of greening themselves. And let's see, Carol, what else did we talk about?
We talked about creating a pollinator garden in the temple, and a film or a book club featuring an environmental activists, and getting local environmental activists to come speak.
Great. All right. I see a new face, Jay Futterman. Nice to see you.
Yeah.
Where are you from?
Hi. Highland Park, Illinois, just north of Chicago.
Oh, great. Great. Good to see you. Thanks for coming tonight. Were you in a different group than
I was in that group that just spoke with Lisa and Carol.
And Ziv Stern, you're a new face. I hear you're helping us with the letters. Is that right?
That's right. I've
Great.
come to make all the administrative behind the scenes stuff run as smoothly as possible.
Good. Great. And Eliane? Is this your first meeting or we've?
Yeah, yeah, I was on here once before.
Yeah, I thought so.
Yes,
And where are you?
Excuse me?
Where are you?
Oh, in Portland, Oregon.
Oh, great. We got
Yeah.
coast to coast then.
Yes.
So
and
in our group, we talked about old fashioned phone calls and new fashioned Twitter and and alerting the big and demonstrating in front of big organizations. That's so we talked about those kinds of things. All right, well, we'll write these down and
I can report
consider
from
them.
our group. We talked about
Oh,
investing in climate friendly innovations, and then possibly getting school districts and your like businesses to, if there's 401ks, to allow you to invest in climate friendly mutual funds, creating more white papers for the website, and then doing a monthly calling campaign. So similar to having the background and kind of a sample of what to say for the letters, but doing it specifically for calling with a script, and then, and like, even like reminders, emails, texts to people with saying, here's, you know, it's your day to call. And so that we can get, like throughout the month, we can get calls going into our representatives' offices.
okay, great.
In our group, we talked about so not just letters for specific legislation, but both like sort of building relationships with the members on the appropriate committees, as well as new leadership in other branches of government. So, you know, a new leader at Department of Interior, at EPA, in the brand new White House Office of Domestic Climate Policy, you know, and that we might just want to do outreach to those people. And the new Biden is reinvigorating the faith office.
Yes,
Right. Yeah.
yes, I've been getting letters from them, emails
Yeah,
from
so
them. Every
we'll,
week they have a meeting.
So those were some of the things we talked about. And then there was a good question about state. Do we continue to focus on national, or are there opportunities for state, highlighting state actions? And we started to dig in on strategy a little bit. Like, is this something that we do? Is it something that we, you know, monthly letters, it works. It is great. People are excited. People know about it. So we know, like, but every Tu B'Shvat, there's going to be a special something you can do, or every, you know, like, is there like once a quarter, or like for a special holiday, or for like, that way people can come again, it becomes cyclical, you know, sort of on the theme of the inspiration, right? Like becoming this like cyclical component, right? Where people know to expect that, like, you're going to have a special opportunity to do an action, and it's always going to be here and here. So like, can you build that in? So.
Great. All right, well, and our
And
next.
I've got one more thing to add. It's
Yeah.
like when there's like new rules, like EPA and other thing have rules, and they allow comments. I think that would be great to have, just like we have the action alert. The actions for the
public comments.
But I think we should have action for public comment.
Okay.
Yes, because now the government might actually listen to the comments.
Yes, that's right. Exactly. That's right. All right. Well, these are all fabulous ideas. And Mira, let's see. Oh, if you're interested in trying out calling your master. Oh, yes. So we do want to keep encouraging you to have a call with your members of Congress. And on March 18th, Diana is having a green recovery launch. That's day after tomorrow, right? Thursday. So look for that. And that's on our newsletter, in the newsletter. And also Mirala just put it in the chat. Lots to do. And so we need more hands on deck, and people to lead some of these good ideas. And so we'll discuss these and pick some of them to start doing perhaps in the near future. All right. Okay, so tonight we have, let me get to my proper notes. I've run out of paper. and I didn't want to put it on my computer. But tonight, our speaker, Karen Perry Stillerman from the Union of Concerned Scientists, in her remarks, her remarks are going to directly address and expand on this month's action alert, which is on climate solutions in agriculture. I hope that you all have looked at least at the newsletter entry, and then you can go right to the link to our website to see all the details about the action alert. We chose this topic because of Passover coming up and how we were released from slavery in order to go to a land of milk and honey that we were to steward. And many faiths communities are focusing on this for Earth Day. So that we should care for not just the planet Earth, but the earth actually below our feet. So Karen Perry Stillerman has a master's degree in public affairs and environmental policy from Indiana University. And she was the deputy director of the environment and health program at Physicians for Social Responsibility. And she advocated for national and international bans on persistent pollutants, testifying before the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. And now she is the senior strategist and senior analyst in the Food and Environmental Program at the Union of Concerned Scientists. And she works with their senior scientists to generate new analysis of wide-ranging impacts of our food system and to communicate the links between farming practices, productive soil, and the public's health and well-being. Welcome to Carrie, and I turn the floor over to you. You'll make her a host.
Okay, quiet.
Right, everybody mute except Carrie.
Well, thank you very much, Devorah, and thanks everyone. I'm happy to be here and to talk with you about this topic and hopefully give you some useful context and background for the action alert that you have. I am going to try to share my screen and we shall see if that works. It's telling me one participant can share at a time. Yes. There we go. And what I want to do is, okay, can everyone see that? Excellent. Very good. Well, so I am going to talk about safeguarding soil, but before I start, I am going to make the assumption that not everyone is terribly familiar with the Union of Concerned Scientists. So I'll tell you a little bit about who we are. At the Union of Concerned Scientists, we put rigorous science to work to build a healthier planet and a safer world. And we lead with solutions, helping regular people and elected officials find the best ways to respond to the consequences of climate change, to cut our oil use in half, ramp up renewable energy, build a healthier food system, reduce the threat from nuclear weapons, and more. And our staff includes scientists, engineers, economists, and analysts, and then also people like me who don't fall in any of those categories, but rather are strategists and communication specialists. To address some of the most pressing problems we face today, we mobilize some of the nation's top scientists, along with our network of more than 500,000 members and supporters, and our science network of 20,000 scientists and technical experts across the country to take action. So that's a little bit about UCS. So let's talk about soil. Many people think of soil as just dirt, but soil is at the foundation of our food system, and taking care of it is vital for our future. Healthy soil is full of life, including beneficial insects, fungi, microbes that recycle organic matter into nutrients for growing plants. And healthy living farm soils do a lot of things. They provide a lot of benefits, from promoting healthy crops to absorbing and holding water, to preventing pollution, storing carbon, and helping to ensure that farmers and their communities can thrive. Yet, decades of short-sighted farm policies have incentivized practices, and these include growing just 1 or 2 crops instead of more diverse rotations, or leaving soil bare after harvest, as you can see on the slide here, that have depleted and damaged this foundation. So today, according to analysis that my team did recently, US farms are currently losing twice as much topsoil to erosion every year as the Great Plains lost in a typical year at the height of the 1930s Dust Bowl. That was one of the most devastating agricultural and social disasters in our history, and we really don't want to repeat it. But soil erosion will get worse if we don't act. And my team's lead scientist modeled 3 scenarios for our future. So if you look at this chart, the middle line there is where we're headed at current rates of soil loss. And we're headed toward losing another 3 inches of soil by the year 2100. And that accounts for 300 years worth of soil at the rate that soil forms naturally. And then if you look at the red dotted line, that shows how much more soil we could lose if we do nothing, while at the same time more intense storms, floods, and droughts driven by climate change damage the nation's farm soils further. So this is what it looks like when soil is left unprotected against heavy spring rains. Along with all of the soil particles washing off that field, pollutants like nitrogen from excess fertilizer are also running off. They're getting into streams and rivers and seeping into groundwater. And this is a big problem because nitrate contaminated drinking water is hazardous to people's health, and it's also expensive to treat. A recent analysis by my team's economists showed that if current trends continue, the state of Iowa could spend as much as $333 million over the next 5 years just for continued nitrate removal from drinking water. And nearly 3/4 of these expenses are borne by small rural communities who can least afford to put in expensive treatment equipment. So further downstream, nitrogen pollution from farm soils is a major contributor to the Gulf of Mexico dead zone. This is a phenomenon that appears every summer as a result of nitrogen and other nutrients washing off farm fields and flowing down the Mississippi River all the way to the Gulf. Down in the Gulf, in a complex series of biological interactions, those nutrients feed the growth of algae, which then blooms and then dies, sucking oxygen out of the water and killing and displacing aquatic life. So this dead zone is measured every year, and usually the measurement corresponds to the size of a state like Connecticut or New Jersey. But though its size fluctuates based on how much rainfall the Midwest received in the spring and how warm the coastal waters are, it isn't getting any smaller. So that farm pollution continues to run downstream and cause these problems. And farm pollution in the Gulf and the dead zone also harm the livelihoods of people who rely on fishing and shrimping in those waters. According to our analysis, nitrogen losses from farms upstream have caused up to $2.4 billion in damages to fisheries and marine habitat every year since 1980. And the impact of that often falls on people of color and immigrants who rely on fishing and shrimping in the Gulf. And again, things will only get worse if we don't act, as climate change brings more intense spring storms and water temperatures in the Gulf continue to rise. Neglecting our soil also means losing an opportunity to remove carbon from the atmosphere and store it underground. We also lose an opportunity to build farmers' resilience to the climate change that is already happening. Here you see a farm family that has been flooded. Carbon-rich soil full of organic matter acts like a sponge, soaking up and holding more moisture. Farm fields with damaged soils, on the other hand, are more likely to flood under heavy rains, while farms and ranches with degraded soil dry up more quickly during droughts. And we're all shouldering a heavy burden for this damage. Between 2009 and 2018, the taxpayer-funded federal crop insurance program paid out $52 billion for flood and drought-related claims alone. And again, such claims are likely to increase as a result of climate change. So that's the problem that we're facing with soil and farming practices today. And now I want to talk about how to build healthy living soil, prevent water pollution, buffer farmers and downstream communities from floods and droughts, and store more carbon in the soil. So scientists and farmers working together have defined or developed and refined a number of proven soil building practices. And what all those practices have in common is that they keep soil covered and undisturbed with living roots in the soil year round. So one of the first things that farmers can do is diversify their crop rotations. So this graph shows some of the lack of diversity in US crop production, particularly in grain crops. That green line that stays pretty constant up at the top is corn, and it's king. But note that orange line that starts at about 40 million acres harvested in 1920, and then just drops and drops and drops. Oats are a crop that US farmers used to grow a lot of, along with barley and rye. They're a cool season crop, which means they're growing primarily at a different time of year than corn, and we just don't plant them anymore. Now, this guy is part of a group of farmers in Iowa that's with ways to incorporate these crops back into rotations to add fertility, disrupt pests' life cycles, and keep living roots in the ground for more months out of the year. So he's standing in a field of mature oats with corn on either side. And that rotation gives a lot of benefits, from reducing pests and pesticide use to reducing the need for excess fertilizers and building that healthy, spongy soil. So the next practice I want to talk about is growing cover crops and also planting less or not at all. Cover crops are planted in between cash crops, and their purpose is exactly what it sounds like: to keep soil covered and protected and help it absorb rainfall and snow melt. So the vegetation shown here is a cover crop of barley, and the farmer is actually planting corn seed right into it. So there's no plowing required and virtually no soil disturbance. Next on the list of healthy soil farming practices is planting perennial plants. Now, perennials are plants that grow year-round, not just during the summer months, like annual crops. And here, a researcher from Iowa State University is inspecting a mix of deep-rooted native perennial plants on a farm in Iowa. The university developed a program in which narrow strips of prairie are planted in and around the farm. And they've shown by planting prairie strips on just 10% of a farm's acreage, you can decrease nitrogen runoff by 90%. And the flowering plants are also great for pollinators. So here's what that looks like in action. At the top is corn, the dark green in the middle is soybeans, and then you can see those strips of prairie interspersed doing their jobs, decreasing runoff, building that healthy, spongy soil with their deep roots. The last thing I want to talk about is improving grazing management. So in agriculture today, livestock and crops are mostly raised separately, but that isn't how natural ecosystems work. So when crops and livestock instead are raised together, the manure fertilizes the crops and the crops feed the animals. So the cattle shown here might graze on the residue of that corn shown in the picture after the corn is harvested. There are also improved grazing practices like rotating animals to a different small pasture every few days, which serves to prevent soil compaction and maximizes the growth of pasture plants both above and below ground, enabling those pastures to store more carbon. So now we know how to rebuild the critical life support system that is soil, but we need science-based public policies that invest in it. Because farmers by and large haven't been using these practices, maybe for a couple of generations now, they often don't know how, or they don't have the right equipment, or in some cases they're wary of taking on additional expenses like the cost of cover crop seed. So even though research shows that these practices do pay off, increasing yields and lowering costs over time, most farmers need upfront financial and technical assistance to make the shift. So there's lots of ways we can do that. Just a week after taking office, President Biden, you're probably familiar with this, signed an executive order on tackling the climate crisis. Among other provisions, that order noted the role of farmers and directed the Secretary of Agriculture to seek input and make recommendations on how to best use the U.S. Department of Agriculture's resources to encourage the adoption of climate smart farming practices. And so we're going to be following up and making sure that they do that and use every possible lever they have at the USDA to help farmers build healthy soil. Now, I also want to talk about the Agriculture Resilience Act of 2020, which Rabbi Fred referenced in his opening. So it was introduced by Representative Shelley Pingree. She is herself an organic farmer from Maine. That's Representative Pingree there. The goal of the legislation was to give farmers the tools to become net zero by 2040. And it's a large piece of legislation. It has many, many provisions in it. Rabbi Fred mentioned a few of them in his opening, but some of the ones that I want to emphasize are ramping up healthy soil research and incentives to help farmers make the switch to these practices we've talked about. Technical assistance to help farmers manage climate risks that are bearing down on them. It includes crop insurance discounts for practices that reduce those risks so that crops aren't failing and taxpayers aren't paying out for those failures that could have been prevented. And it includes, it would ask, I think, the USDA and the Department of Treasury to study the feasibility of a federal income tax credit to incentivize carbon capture on farm soils. And then there's lots of other provisions. Fred mentioned provisions about food waste and other things. So this legislation is not likely, it hasn't been reintroduced in this Congress yet, although we expect that it will be soon. But it's not likely to pass in just this form as a standalone bill. However, I think there are ways that we could use this as what they call a marker bill for the next farm bill in a couple of years. And even before that, there may be opportunities to wrap these provisions into legislation in Congress. So for example, there is FY22 appropriations. That's one thing that Congress can do right now through the appropriations process to provide the USDA with more resources to help farmers build their soil and resilience. So you've got that excellent action alert that's been prepared for you, and there are details in there about the funding requests that colleagues at the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition have developed. So I won't get into those here, but to say also that there may be another opportunity this year to fold elements of the Agriculture Resilience Act into a possible climate or infrastructure bill that congressional leaders may take up possibly in the fall, maybe as a part of COVID recovery efforts. So we can stay tuned for that as well. So I want to end here by saying that I'm hopeful that we can make real progress this year to tackle the climate crisis, and that farmers and their soil can be part of the solution. Farmers and voters in farm states have, I think, resisted seeing climate change for a long time, but they're seeing the effects of it bearing down on them now. And in a 2019 poll that we took of 3,000 plus voters in 5 key farm states, overwhelming majorities of voters in each state agreed that extreme weather is a significant threat to farmers and communities in their area. And even when asked specifically if climate change is affecting local agricultures, majorities acknowledged that it is. So I think that we are making headway in bringing this constituency to a better understanding of climate change, how it affects them, and their role in being part of the solution. And of course, safeguarding soil and the future of our food system is something that we can all agree on. So now is really the time to act. And with that, thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take questions if you have them.
Great. Thank you so much. It's really very information packed for writing our letters this month. So that's great. And the pictures were great as well. Let me take, are there a couple of questions people would like to ask? Anybody have a question?
I see D.
Eliane?
Yeah, so I was wondering, what kind of opposition is there from the, the pesticide and the chemical companies? Because they have to lose in this kind of agricultural practice.
Yeah, so I think that is the biggest opposition. Obviously, the kinds of practices that I'm talking about that really build resilience and deliver all of these ecological benefits, they tend to be knowledge-oriented practices rather than input-oriented practices. And so, when farmers don't need to buy more things, that does upset the companies that want to sell them more things. So yeah, I think that the big chemical companies, the Farm Bureau that purports to represent farmers, but in fact is a big insurance company, these are the organizations and entities standing in the way. However, I think we do have different leadership in Congress, and I think people who have a better understanding of long-term what's best for farmers and people in farm communities, and that we just can't stay on the path that we're on. And
Vilsack is back in town, is that right? He's the agriculture secretary. Is that a good, and do you feel that's you're thinking about it?
Yeah, so I guess there was many progressive groups hoped for a fresher, newer face in the Secretary of Agriculture's office. And, we've got a hole to climb out of. There was the former guy, is that what we're calling him? The former guy did a lot of damage to science in federal agencies, and the USDA was one of those where science was really decimated. And so I think somebody like Tom Vilsack, who knows that agency inside and out, was the right person, I think many people think, to hit the ground running. And I think he's learned a lot. And everything we've seen from the appointments that he has made and the early steps he's taken suggests that he's approaching the job differently this time.
Good. Okay, Jay, unmute yourself.
Yeah.
There you go.
So a question about this, how do you suggest approaching, say, people in farm country or their representatives? I mean, there's this massive cultural divide in this country, and we're kind of urban, suburban, progressive Jews, and on the other side is rural farmers, and there's this societal wall that's really sprouted up over the last however many years. So what do you advise as sort of communication skills to kind of break down that barrier?
Yeah. So I mentioned the polling that shows that even farmers are coming around to climate change, those words, but but I mean, part of the reason that talking about healthy soil is maybe a better approach is that it sort of sidesteps that whole politicized climate conversation and really talks about farmers' view of sort of stewardship and legacy and building something for the next generation. So, you know, building soil rather than mining soil. But you know, and talking about, I mean, they see the extreme weather. They see the everything from the massive flooding to terrible droughts to the derecho that came through and flattened all of the cornfields in Iowa. They know something's going on, and I think they do feel a bit stuck and on a treadmill. And so offering some solutions for how they could get out of that rut and do something different. But like I said, they do. Farmers are operating on thin margins. They're just like all humans. They're wary of change. So if they haven't seen someone do this thing, then they're loath to try it because it feels like a gamble. And so, you know, this is where I think oftentimes they feel like as soon as you bring up these topics, you're on a slippery slope to regulation, but that's not really what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is giving farmers tools. And so I think if we can talk about farmers getting tools to do something that will be better for them and for the water, soil, and air around them, that's a win-win.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Jay, for that question. Somebody else?
Four people with hands up, if you don't see the raised hand.
Yes, no, I do see. Maury, you want to?
Are there, if I may say, grassroots movements among farmers to make the kind of changes that you're talking about?
There are. And so I showed that one picture of the farmer standing in the oat field. He's part of a group called the Practical Farmers of Iowa. And they are really, they're out there experimenting and trying to develop these new models and think about new markets for crops like oats. So there's also the National Farmers Union, which has, there are farmers unions in, I would say, 35 or so states. So they're not everywhere, but in many states there's a National Farmers Union, and that really is a sort of progressive farmer voice. So yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
Great. Elliot. Thank you, Maury.
So it seems like you are, working with these relatively small farmers, but when I think about trends in agriculture, a lot of the small family farms have closed and big agriculture has kind of swallowed up a lot of the terrain, so to speak. And I'm wondering how big agriculture factors into all these efforts.
Yeah, I mean, still most farms are family operated farms. They're just operating on very large acreages. And so when I think about big agriculture, it's more about the input industries and the food, the grain buying industries that we're talking about. Farmers are still mostly family farms. Yeah.
Yeah, and NPR said something about 30% of them are going to retire in the next 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, so the average age of the American farmer is rather advanced, and I think so part of some of the provisions that we champion in Farm Bill years, but there may be other opportunities to do it, is about new and beginning farmers, trying to develop the farmers of the next generation, and tend to think that that young farmers coming to it bring a different energy and maybe more innovation and maybe more openness to trying new things because they haven't been doing the same thing for 40 years. So yeah, I think that's part of it, is bringing in that new generation of farmers.
All right. Well, we're running up against our hour time, but thank you so much, Karen. That was very, very informative about what's going on in our farms and how important the soil, rejuvenating the soil. Like we didn't learn anything from the Depression, it sounds like, yet. So don't forget that, well, this is a very active month coming up, April. Thursday is Diana's launch. And then, of course, Earth Day is April 22nd. The JCAN of Massachusetts is having a webinar on April 25th. And the Reclaim Act, if any of you wrote letters for the Reclaim Act for rejuvenating coal mining towns, that's coming up for legislation if you want to write an extra letter. We have a YouTube channel and our newsletter, and that's it. Mirala, you got anything, or Ed, Dee, anything else? Yeah, Dee.
I would just say, since several people had hands up that didn't get to ask their questions, is there
I
a
didn't-
way? Is there a way that, Karen, that people can get in touch with you?
Mhm. You're muted, Karen. There's her email right there.
UCS USA.
Yeah, K Stillerman at ucsusa.org.
Okay.
Or tweet.
Thank you very much, Karen. That was great.
And Mirala, what are you saying, Mirala? National Conference on JCAN National Conference on April 25th. Oh, you're giving the link for that. Yes, thank you. I'll be talking at that as well. My husband and I are going to speak at that. So I want to wish everyone a zizan, a sweet Pesach. And I heard a talk today that was talking about there's no difference without vows between mitzvot and matzot. And Rabbi Michael Marmer, one of the funniest and most brilliant lecturers from HUC, said, don't turn your mitzvot into matzot. Don't harden and dry out your mitzvot, your action. So tzedek, tzedek tirdof. May you righteous people who are doing sacred work, may you continue to pursue justice and keep up the wonderful work. Mirala is defining things. Thank you very much. Your commandments and your matzah. Don't make them the same. All right. Great to talk to everybody. There were a couple of new people. Let's see. David, there's a David here. Is that somebody we know? On a phone.
Not new. David Krantz from HC, Ecological Judaism.
Great. Great. Good to see you. And Judy.
Good to see you all.
Here. Yes. All right.
Thank you, Fred.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much, Fred and Karen. Terrific.
Thank you all.
All right. Good night, all.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful Pesach. Good
Thank
night.
you.
You know what? I think I want to write a little blurb for the newsletter. Hi, Judy.
Like to see you.
Yeah. Oh, I used your husband's PowerPoint at the Northern California meeting. It was great. I loved it.
Right. Did you catch Karen's email? I couldn't write that.
Well, I have, what is it? K Stillerman at ucsusa.org, was it?
Probably, I can double check.
Probably.
I'll look.
Yeah. Yeah, she's on there. She's definitely, it's easier to get her email.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, this
I
was
was, as people were talking about a book club or something, I've read a couple of wonderful books about soil, and Entangled Life is about fungus among us. It's